Ms. Deputy Prime Minister, thank you very much for this very interesting and productive expose of all the projects. Many of them are going to be materialized through PPP. So we have a business ahead. We're going to organize a number of events related with PPP, and we are very happy that we have you with us today. Our next speaker and great sponsor of us is Thomas Lubeck, the Regional Manager of Western Balkans of IFC. Please let us invite him to the podium. Join me to welcome him. I think Mr. Lubeck covers a number of countries, not only Serbia, but you are a regional director, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. How do you start?
So thanks very much. As mentioned, my name is Thomas Lubeck, and I'm the Regional Manager for Central and Southeastern Europe for IFC, the member of the World Bank Group that focuses on private sector development. First and foremost, thanks to Deputy Prime Minister Mihajlovic for taking time out of our very busy schedule to come and be with us today to get us kicked off. Also, thanks very much indeed to Mr. Tsomokos and our other partners to bring this conference to you here today. So this conference is really happening in the right place at the right time. As Deputy Prime Minister has already mentioned, I mean, there's been some very exciting contracts that have been signed in recent months. It's Nikola Tesla Airport, as well as the waste-to-energy project here in Belgrade. So more about those later, I think in great detail and to be discussed from a number of different perspectives and angles. What I wanted to do in my couple of minutes here was actually to talk about a couple of the global mega trends that IFC sees as the leading multilateral investment arm in emerging markets for the private sector. There's a lot of things happening that I think are relevant for Serbia as well. So there's two things that we do, very briefly. I mean, IFC invests in infrastructure projects, private infrastructure projects in emerging markets, and we also have a specialized transaction advisory service that helps governments put together bankable projects to meet certain specific infrastructure needs. So over the past decade, we have invested $28 billion globally and also mobilized another $25 billion into things like power, transport, potable and wastewater, as well as energy. So globally, we've financed about 40 gigawatts of power in general, with a major focus on renewable energy. Very briefly, on our PPP and Transaction Advisory Service, over the past 10 years, we've signed 300 projects in 88 different countries around the world, generating nearly 22 billion of investment, but also more importantly, and what the real ultimate goal is that the quality of economic as well as social infrastructure was improved for about 98 million people. So if we look globally, I mean, the gaps in infrastructure right now are absolutely daunting. So a couple of statistics is that there's 1.2 billion people globally that lack access to electricity completely. Another 2.6 billion that can't access electricity on full time. 3 billion people rely on wood, coal, and animal waste for heating and cooking. 666 million people lack access to drinking water. And as you can imagine, the list goes on quite a bit. The only one I'll quote is that with cities, it's expected that by 2045, another 2 billion people, or a 50% increase, will be moving into cities. 6 billion in total, which will be putting a major strain on municipal infrastructure in cities. So another major area of focus for us as well. In terms of the investment numbers, we estimate the world needs to invest and spend $3.3 trillion per year on infrastructure in order to maintain global growth of about 3%. Now, try to stay with me here on these next numbers. Of the 3.3 billion, 1.9 trillion is needed in emerging markets where governments are only investing 1 trillion. So there's a $900 billion US dollar gap each and every single year. Of the 1 trillion that governments are spending, it constitutes 80% of all of the investment that's going into infrastructure in emerging markets. So there's a lot of fiscal constraints on governments, so there's not too much more that they'll be able to do by themselves. Of course, what we're here to talk about today is that PPPs could be part of the potential solution. In our experience, I wanted to share a couple of things that we think are very, very important to make sure that these contracts are successful. First is that contract management is very, very important. PPPs are long-term relationships lasting 15, 25, 30 years, like a marriage, really. So when you have the documentation, you plan for as much as you possibly can there, but over such a long period of time, there's going to be things that come up that nobody thought about before, and you need to have the flexibility as well as the capacity to negotiate and open items and then address them as they come along. Of course, second is the fiscal affordability and sustainability. I mean, there's this balance that's very, very important between the affordability for the government, affordability for the end users or taxpayers in the equation, but then also the profitability and the bankability for the private sector. So all of these things are very important balance, and ones where it's really important to get the risk and reward allocation absolutely right. Then, obviously as well, regulation. So really the balance here is, again, between the private sector and the government. Without good regulation, your PPP can't really be successful. And there's two sort of approaches on this, where one can go and try to create the best laws and regulations to have them look good on paper. But looking good on paper is never really enough. So sometimes what's important is to take an individual transaction, try and ram it through the system, in which you can highlight practical shortcomings in laws or regulations that need to be fixed. Very important to take the practical approach as well. So I'm going to stop there. Ms. Deputy Prime Minister, I love to throw these trillions and billions numbers around. So working together with you, our other partners here, we try and capture as much of those billions and trillions for investment in infrastructure in Serbia. Wishing everyone interesting and productive conference.